Hey there, Wastelanders. It's Grimm Grinner, aka Edward, here on all channels, bringing you Grimm Grinner's Cache. This is a small, fun little series that I kind of came up with. I don't know how many episodes I'll do or how frequently I'll post them, but I did feel like doing something a little bit different from the stories you're used to hearing through me. This is going to be a bit of a behind-the-scenes look into my process and my writing for Welcome to the Wastes, all the production and everything like that. I have been doing these small Easter egg behind-the-scenes videos to put up on TikTok and Instagram, but those are essentially just the short burst versions of what I plan to do with this. These episodes may have specific areas of focus, kind of like today's episode, or they'll go into a range of topics and I'll kind of ramble for whoever knows how long. There will be potentially spoilers, especially for season 1, as well as potential hints and teasers and maybe even small spoilers if I get carried away on stuff to do with season 2, season 3, and further beyond. So, without further ado, here we go. Let's get into it. This is Grimm Grinner on all channels.
This is Grimm Grinner.
This is Grimm Grinner.
This is Grimm
This is
Grinner.
Grimm Grinner.
This is Grimm Grinner.
This is Grimm Grinner.
On all channels.
On all channels.
On all channels.
On all channels.
All channels.
Welcome to the Waste.
Welcome to the Waste.
Welcome to the Wastes.
Welcome to the Waste.
Welcome to the Wastes.
Welcome to the Waste.
Welcome to the Wastes. Okay, so for today's episode of Grimm Grinner's Cache, I want to talk about a concept that I'm really going to play heavily with going into the second season, and even more so going into the third season. Especially there's a mini-series that I'd like to put into season 3, or maybe even between season 2 and season 3, that plays with the concept of as much as everyone is the hero of their own story, we all also can potentially be the villain of someone else's. This is a concept I absolutely love, especially in regards to like post-apocalyptic or wasteland adjacent media. Stuff like The Last of Us, Borderlands, and The Walking Dead especially. But I know there's plenty of other stories, both as books, movies, TV shows, that kind of play with this concept as well. But those three that I mentioned are probably going to be the predominant ones that I talk about in this. Spoiler warning for those games and shows, if you haven't played or watched them. Just a heads up, I will be going into spoiler territory for those, especially in regards to how I'm working with those concepts in the podcast. So, as some people who may follow me on social media know, I recently did another playthrough of The Last of Us Part 2. And I know that game got a lot of flack on initial release. There were a lot of people who were really upset about how that game approached things, namely in regards to Joel, and then playing the game through and then switching to playing as this character who, for the first half of the game, you see as the villain. Like we're playing as Ellie throughout that game, and then it switches and you play as Abby. And I know a lot of people were really upset at the idea of, taking control of the villain of the game, apparently. But for me, that's exactly what I loved about it, and that's why I wanted to do a second playthrough. As well as I wanted to play with like the 3D audio on PS5 and just get that proper sound experience for myself. But just the concepts behind that game were really amazing to me. Both the first and the second. Because, yeah, like, through the first game we play as Joel, and you kind of get a sense that like he's not altogether a bad guy. He's essentially doing what he needs to do to survive, and even going into the second game, like, that's the kind of concept you've gone with. Like, people would do what they need to do to survive, especially in some sort of zombie apocalypse or just apocalypse in general. But then once you play through Abby's story, you start to understand that, like, from her perspective, throughout the end of the first game and going through the second game, Ellie and Tommy and Joel, like, they're the villains for her and for the wolves. And yes, the wolves seem like kind of a militant force, and you spend a lot of the game messing them up. But, like, the same idea comes about. Like, they're just doing what they need to do to survive, and to try and rebuild what they see as an ideal formation going forward with society. And that's a concept I'm really wanting to play with in Season 2, especially in the idea of the wolves, and, like, the militia style force to it. In Season 2, we're going to meet a group called the Twin City Militia, or the Twin Town Militia. Sorry. The Twin Town Militia, who are kind of doing something very similar. They are much more of a military force in the wastes, a little more north, so that their territory doesn't overlap too much with the corporate territory. But they're not evil, they're not good. Because from the perspective of our characters going through the wastes, they're not the greatest thing to have. They won't really be viewed as the good guys. But according to that group, they are the good guys. They're trying to bring order, they're trying to bring structure. And that's something I really liked playing with in The Last of Us. Just that idea of, like, seeing what it is like for another group to be trying to survive and trying to do what they think is right, despite the fact that they are still doing some really shady kind of evil stuff. Like, when we meet the leader of the wolves, he's in the middle of, like, is just torturing a guy for information. So, like, yeah, it's kind of just an interesting concept to me, playing around in that game. And then to kind of springboard off that, what made me love that concept in that game was actually, interestingly enough, in The Walking Dead, we eventually met Negan, played by Jeffrey Dean Morgan. And right off the bat, he makes himself out to be, he is 100% the villain. Like, we've been following Rick and his crew, and Negan just shows up and bashes in heads of people we've watched this series with and have loved through the first few seasons. And yeah, he's a scumbag. He's a piece of shit. But I think even in the talk show that used to follow The Walking Dead, I think still does. I don't watch cable much anymore. In one of the later episodes of it, as we were dealing with this whole Negan situation in the show, one of the actors that was on even made the comment of, we're only seeing Negan as the villain because we're seeing it from Rick's perspective, and, like, Rick and his group's perspective. But if we had followed Negan from episode 1, and we had followed his story, and his growth into this character swinging a barbed wire baseball bat at people, we would see Rick and his group as the villains. And realistically, they kind of are. Like, they don't even know who Negan is. And they run raids on his camps and kill his people while they sleep. And, like, all this kind of stuff. And that's what villains do. but because we've been following them, that's the heroic move. That's the idea. That's a good thing. Because Negan's group is bad. And I think even in like the little addition to the most recent season of Walking Dead, they really did. They did go back and they did told a little bit of Negan's backstory, and like the show's kind of been building Negan as like, okay, you know, he's no longer 100% the villain. He did still do some shitty stuff, but now we're trying to understand his character. And I know a lot of people don't like that idea. A lot of people don't want to understand the villain. Which is understandable. You don't need to understand every villain. Like, you don't need to sit there and like pick apart a character or a person and find every way to understand why they became the villain of this story. But this idea in post-apocalyptic stuff that the villains can definitely be horrific, horrible villains who like absolutely deserve horrible things happening to them. I mean, Mad Max Fury Road, like you look at a Morton Joe and really, like, when you look at everything in his area, yeah, he is definitely a villain. There's not a lot of there's almost no redeeming factors for him. Especially when we get to the end and we actually see, you know, people getting to actually be people again, instead of essentially cattle. But in certain stories where they get to be more complex and they get to really touch on these elements, like that's why I'm really only talking about these three things. There can be villains who can be written in a way who, when you get to see their side of the story, when you get to understand their side of the story, you can understand why, you know, these characters on the other side who have been heroes to us this whole time can be villains. The third bit of media that I think of with that is the Borderlands series. In particular, Borderlands 2, and Borderlands the pre-sequel. When we have Handsome Jack. And don't get me wrong, Handsome Jack is he is a narcissistic psychopath of a character. Like locking his daughter away and like all the horrible shit he does, like capturing, yeah. he's not a good guy. But like he has a line in Borderlands 2, and I think that's really the line that really makes the pre-sequel a game worth playing, where I think it's in his death, where he says, he's like, "You're the villains, I'm the goddamn hero." And that resonated with me. It's part of the reason I used to cosplay the character. Because, yeah, when you go back and play the pre-sequel, like, he did want to help in the pre-sequel. He wanted to try and do something. Yes, he wanted to find a vault. All of the people around Pandora want to find the vaults and get the power within them. But at the beginning of the game, he wants to find it for a slightly, like, he doesn't want to find it just because he wants to burn Pandora and kill all the bandits and all that kind of stuff. He doesn't initially want it for that reason. Actually, it's been a while since I played it. I can't 100% remember the reason he wants to find it in pre-sequel, but like, he's played more as a slightly noble character. Yes, he's still Moxie's ex. He's still kind of a piece of shit. But he's not this megalomaniac who just wants to see everything burn and wants to destroy anything on Pandora that doesn't agree with his ideals. He doesn't start that way. and you get to the end of the pre-sequel, and the people who have been kind of working with him and trying to actually help decide that that he's not worth helping, and that they're looking at him as a villain already, and then he becomes the villain to them, and he goes, yeah, fine, fuck it, I'll burn you all. And that is very much kind of just that idea of, like, you can, I mean, I guess that kind of ties into, like, the line in Batman, like, you either die the hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Jack saw himself become the villain. He didn't get to die a hero. Even though he still saw himself as the hero the whole time. Like, you're playing through Borderlands 2, and Jack is sitting there acting as if he's the hero sitting on a throne already. But, I mean, yeah, like, Borderlands probably isn't the best example, because, yeah, Jack really is the villain. But, like, Walking Dead and Last of Us really have this idea of, you know, they approach the idea really well of even the heroic characters can be guilty of doing really evil things. I mean, you play Last of Us 1 and Joel fucking kills a whole facility worth of people and takes Ellie and lies and just... He's been the hero throughout the game, but he's not flawless. And getting to see how that turns out, and then getting to play both sides of that outcome are really amazing. And these are all things that I want to incorporate into Welcome to the Wastes. So yeah, now we're gonna get back to the podcast idea stuff. So as we've been following Grimm Grinner through the Wastes, he is definitely the hero of our story. And in no uncertain terms, the corporations are bad. They're definitely not a good thing. They essentially want to sterilize the wastes. They do not want emotion. They do not want people to be free thinking as much as high corporate execs. Like, execs, whoa, words. And I'm leaving all this in, by the way. Like, the corporate execs in Welcome to the Wastes are still allowed to be free thinking, are still allowed to be, you know, emotive and stuff like that. But for the most part, a lot of them are kind of bad people anyways, so, like, their emotions aren't something you really want to emulate. But, like, at the same time, and I've played with this in 2 episodes already in Season 1, in 20.7 CORP, and in Creep Report J-21475. I played with this idea of getting to hear what creeps are doing out in the wastes, and, like, them getting taken out by the judge, or the broadcasts from inside the walls of the GAT in 20.7. And obviously those broadcasts definitely paint Grimm as a rebel, as someone who needs to be found and needs to be exterminated. And essentially, like, I'm looking forward to Season 2 and Season 3. I want to have more episodes like that. I definitely want to play with this idea that while Grimm is most definitely still our hero, he's not the hero to everyone in the wastes. I think I even ended Season 1 with word from a character called the Knave of Truth, and word from the Judge. And obviously these characters are their own beings. The Judge is definitely like a serial killer, and going into Season 2, a cult leader. And he's definitely not a character we should be empathize with. However, I do have ideas for episodes and potentially sub-series where we do get to kind of learn about the judge prior to him being this crazed individual. And I would love to play with that idea of, if something had gone differently for him, he may not be a villain. He may not have been a villain. He may have been able to be another Wastelander, another person fighting with Grimm Grinner, or with any of these groups. And I think early on in season 2 even, I actually have an episode where we get to hear the story of someone who worked in with the corporations. And when this person found out what was going wrong and realized and kind of woke up to what was going wrong, they made a very quick turn, and they are trying to rectify their mistakes. They're trying to atone for their sins. Does it excuse whatever they did beforehand? No, it doesn't. But redemption in a wasteland is definitely possible. And that's something I've loved going in the past couple seasons for, especially like The Walking Dead, like Negan trying to find redemption, trying to atone for what he did. He knows what he did was wrong. It doesn't change that people are forever changed based on his actions. There are people who are no longer with the groups that we followed because of what he did. It doesn't change any of that, but he can still seek redemption, and he can still try to find it. And I love that idea with characters in a post-apocalyptic wasteland, like being able to try and find redemption for what you've done wrong. And that's something also I'd love to play with Grimm Grinner himself. Like, we've been following ever since he got his equipment set up in the Atomic Maple with CJ. And there are some elements that I loved that I'm approaching both with the bonus episode for my birthday and some episodes in season 2 that kind of go back a little before that and touch on some of his backstory and touch on maybe what he was up to prior to becoming the voice of the Wastes. But that also doesn't mean that there may not be sins from his past that may show up and may paint him in a less than heroic light. Does that make him any less the character that you all have grown to love and follow in this wasteland and hear in your headphones? No, it does not erase this character, and it doesn't make him any less of a heroic character moving forward. But it does mean that he is not free of flaws. He is not free of, maybe making the wrong decision here and there. Taking out a target that he was supposed to bring in, or something like that. Like there's elements that I haven't written, that I haven't formulated yet, but there's elements that I have, and I'm not gonna spoil a lot of them. But I'd love to play with that idea more, and especially going, I'm definitely over the next couple seasons, definitely pay attention to things people say, and things Grimm says, because a lot of that will start to really paint a bigger picture for Grimm Grinner, for the corporations, for the judge, for the Knave of Truth, for any of these characters. No character in a post-apocalyptic wasteland is 100% clear of any wrongdoing. To put it in like D&D terms, lawful good doesn't really exist. Chaotic good, probably. Maybe neutral good. But lawful good, no one can properly be 100% that in a post-apocalyptic wasteland, because to try and even be that, you wouldn't be able to. In a wasteland, people do things to survive, and that can either make you the villain, that can make you a hero, but even if you're the hero, you're the villain to someone else. I mean, that's just true, and like that's a concept that I love in these stories, but is also true in reality. I mean, we have all had, an ex or several exes who you are absolutely the villain in their story after things go down, or vice versa. They could also be the villain to your story. That doesn't mean, okay, trying to come up with wording on this one. Just because someone is the villain to your story doesn't mean your story ends, though. We don't all get strapped to a table with a laser going to slice us, and we escape in the nick of time, and the villain gets their comeuppance. And that's kind of an idea. Like, the villain doesn't always get their comeuppance. They can, and in traditional stories, they most definitely do. The villain goes down. The villain pays for their crimes. But in real life, the villain doesn't always get that, and that sucks. But it doesn't mean that the hero can't still continue being a hero for their story. I mean, me personally, I've straddled both of those lines. I am most definitely the villain to a handful of people's stories, but I'm also the hero to my story, and I'm potentially the hero to other people's stories as well, even in small ways. And that's part of why I've wanted to do this podcast for so long, and why I've pushed it in the direction it is, because as we learn more about Grimm's story, as we learn about potential wrongdoings from his past, as we learn about what he's doing going forward, I definitely want there to be a sense at times that he is seeking some degree of redemption. He is seeking some degree of knowing that whatever he has done in his past has been worth what he seeks to get in his future. Yeah. This has been very much a ramble. This first episode is going to be really long. My apologies to everyone listening. If you've made it this far, congratulations, and you have my love and respect. But yeah, essentially, I do really love the idea of heroes aren't always 100% heroes, villains aren't always 100% villains. There are obviously a lot of instances where, yes, they absolutely are, especially in real life. There are definitely people who are just villains, and definitely people who are very, very heroic. But in fictional stories that can be written with all sorts of nuance and all sorts of gray areas, it's definitely easy to have elements of a story where a villain may not always be a villain for long, or may seek redemption in a different way, or maybe their path just took the wrong turn, and with one change to it, it could have gone very differently. And I love this idea, and I'm excited to play with it more going forward. As of the time of this recording, I am still working on Season 2. I am working on introducing a lot of these elements that I've discussed into Season 2. There's a mini-series going into Season 3 that is definitely going to heavily play with this. And Season 3 is probably going to touch on some of it a bit more. That's really all I have for now. Thank you for listening. Hopefully the next episode will be less of a ramble, and I can maybe come up with some more fun stuff. If anyone out there would actually like to do an episode of this with me that we could post up and kind of talk about other stuff. I would definitely love to kind of have this series or sub-series to Welcome to the Waste very much become traditional podcasty. So if you want to talk Wasteland stuff and stories and concepts like being the villain or the hero, let me know. Email is on the profiles and stuff like that. That's all I've got for now. So, this has been Edward, aka Grimm Grinner, on all channels. See you in the wastes. Grimm Grinner's Cache is a Welcome to the Waste production. All licensed material mentioned in this episode is the sole property of their respective copyright holders and is only referenced in regards to research. Welcome to the Waste and Grimm Grinner's Cache are all made possible thanks to the loving support of fans like you. If you like what I do here and you want to support the podcast, as well as get yourself some cool merch like pins, buttons, stickers, and more, definitely check out my Buy Me a Coffee page. All the money there goes towards making this podcast better with each and every passing episode and allow me to do fun things like adventures around town, producing new merch, and much, much more. Definitely consider checking it out and get your name in the credits in the episodes. See you in the wastes.